Welcome back, painters. This is Daniel Ibanez painting in Artrage Vitae, this time on the PC. Again, you can paint in this software on iPad, Android, PC, or Mac. And it is a really lightweight app that can do powerful things. So using today the oil brush right now, but this is really a painting that's done primarily with the palette knife. The palette knife is the great kind of understudy or sidekick to the oil brush, but I think that it also has ability to be the main event. And that's what we're going to explore in this video. And, let me get some of the establishing marks here, some of the establishing values, kind of find my way in this painting a little bit. And then I'll show you where we can plug in the palette knife. The palette knife has a bunch of different presets and a bunch of different ways you can use it. And it's an important tool, both in traditional and in digital painting. So, this painting seemed kind of like a perfect candidate for a quick tutorial because you have a kind of a soft atmospheric background and foreground, and then you just kind of have this hovering figure on their boat in the midground there. And it's the kind of painting that's perfect for a tutorial because these tutorials for this first section are all very tool-based tutorials. I'm trying to show you guys how these tools work, what settings I use, how to mix and match this tool with other tools, etc. And when you're doing a tutorial like that, you don't want to be too bogged down in big compositional dialogue or long-winded color palette discussions. You just want to kind of get paint on canvas and be able to see how the tools work. The one thing that I have kept consistent in this tutorial with the other ones that I've done recently are that I have real color blending turned on, that I'm using some of my custom oil brush settings, and that when I get to the palette knife, you'll start to see the ways that I play with that tool as well. I'm not doing any pre-drawing. I'm not doing any sketching. I'm just going straight into the paint. And that's a good way to work if you're confident in your drawing skills and you feel like you've got a pretty good ability to see proportional relationships and you can place objects on the canvas with confidence. If you want to, that's always a good way to go. If you'd prefer to do your sketch and line work first, that's also great. Here you can see me using the palette knife and how it quickly can just mash together the colors in the background, but you can also turn the loading on and use it as a quick choppy mark that overall just has a lot of magnetism. It's a very powerful way to work. It's a bold and kind of almost like obnoxiously strong mark. So when you're throwing that down on your canvas, you kind of got to know what you're all about, be putting it in the right place, and be able to sort of set it and forget it. You want to be doing what my mentor always talks about, which is 3 looks, 2 thinks, 1 stroke. That 1 stroke with the palette knife is going to be strong, it's going to be bold, but if it's in the right place, it's going to work. So I like to use that palette knife all the time as a sort of, like I said, like the sidekick for my oils, but I think in this case, it works incredibly well as something that has a little bit more parity with the oil brush, or something that works even better in some cases for some applications. And you can see here how the oil brush will sometimes get really thick and it'll lay on really thick chunky paint. Well, the palette knife's great at just going in there and kind of smudging and knocking it down and making those textures a little bit more uniform. And I really love with the realistic color blending turned on that you get these greens and ochres and different colors coming out when the paint is mixing, and it mixes with the palette knife just as well and just as naturally as it does with the oil paint. It's just all about paint body thickness, and that's something you can do with your settings. So far so good, having a fun time bouncing between the oil brush and the palette knife. And what you got to remember is that, like, when you paint, you kind of want to always have 2 tools on hand. I often would break it down into these categories. I like to have a soft edge brush and a hard edge brush. And when you use the oil brush and the palette knife, you always have that. You can set up your oil brush to be kind of a soft edge brush, and you can just use that palette knife as the hard edge brush. But the palette knife is very powerful in that it can be used with or without loading. So it can take the loading down and it can just knock down any hard edge, making it nice and soft and organic. And then you can use it with loading turned on. And in that way, it can be that crispest, hardest edge that you find in the whole painting. So both are good, both are awesome, both are a lot of fun. And when using the palette knife, you can see here that there are actually 5 presets. The first one is the one that is the default, and it is the most utilitarian, most useful. It's great for blending. It's great for working over any area that has just a little bit of need for some refinement. It's great for knocking down complicated areas or softening areas that are just a little too chunky and too strong. The one next to it is kind of like an edge of the palette knife. It almost draws more like a tail-like shape instead of that big, firm, even mark. The next one over from that is the smudging palette knife tool. And then with that, it just acts like as a traditional, smudger or smudging tool, like in Photoshop, where it just moves the pigments and nudges them, and then things get blurry when you use it. And it works. It's fine. I don't use it very much. I prefer the other ones, but it does work like it looks like it works. Fourth one over is kind of like a smudge, but it does it in a kind of a smoky way. And then the final palette knife is this kind of noise palette knife, where it mixes all kinds of things together, whatever's kind of in the general vicinity. But that said, even though the palette knife is great and it can do all kinds of amazing things, I like to be able to use it with the oil brush. That's how I like to use it the most. And even when I'm trying to use the palette knife exclusively, I'll find that I still want to use the oil brush with it. And I think that's just because, as it stands right now, it's a tool that, while it has 5 very good presets, it really only has 2 sliders, whereas the oil brush has a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sliders with a couple different check boxes. And that's huge variety, huge power, huge customization, where the palette knife does have a lot of customization because it has 5 individual settings and 2 sliders, and the whole idea of like loading and not loading. It is a very powerful tool as well, but I do still think that the oil brush is the king of the court when it comes to Artrage tools. The palette knife, again, is like the perfect sidekick. That said, in this painting, I'm going to want to show you just a few more things that the palette knife can do, but I quickly want to get some of the drawing problems worked out of this painting real quick, and then we can go ahead and jump into that. As you can see that I've got the settings for my oil brush that have the thinners turned up and the loading down. What that means is my oil brush is going to work a little bit more like a scratchy dry brush technique, and it's going to work in a way that has a lot of control, where I can really have a good handle on what I'm doing and how this is all going to play out. That said, when I get to the palette knife, that's when I introduce a bit more chaos. And again, like I said, you want to have, maybe a hard edge and a soft edge brush. You want to have some order and you want to have some chaos. You want to have some ability to create variety in your painting in ways that don't take a heck of a long time. And that's what the oil brush is all about. It's about quick blending. It's about quick noise addition. It's about quickly knocking in shapes. And it's a lot about fun. So as you can see here, I am having a lot of fun. I'm able to use the different edges of the palette knife, as you can see with the presets, to make just interesting marks. You can see that the yellow sort of lily pad that I put in the background naturally mixes with the blue, and so you get these interesting color varieties emerging. And what's really fun about that is it's all just automatic. It's just the serendipity of the paint. And I love to show this kind of thing because that's what happens with real painting. Your brush will have a little bit of weird color on it, and you'll go in and try to put a little petal on a flower or whatever, and it just kind of, you get some happy accidents along the way. So that said, Artrage oil brush, the best. Artrage palette knife, the best. And you can see here the different sorts of noise and blending that you can get playing with these different tools. I think that my hope is that as people see these videos, they'll be interested to check it out, that they will play with these tools, and especially play with them in tandem, and that as things continue to evolve, as Artrage continues to get full number updates, as all that starts to happen, we'll get even more variety and capacity out of this already deep and powerful palette knife. That said, we're getting close to the end of this video, and I just want to say thank you for checking it out. Again, this is a little more beginner oriented, whether that's for beginning digital painting or beginning digital painting in Artrage specifically. That said, it's always important to see how people work and their workflow and how they're thinking about things. And with respect to this, these videos are going to keep getting more and more complex as we go. So hopefully you'll get a chance to try out some of these techniques. You kind of put them in your back pocket and can utilize them as we move further into these video series and have more and more fun as we get more advanced with our techniques. You can see here again, just playing with the texture of bouncing right between oil brush and palette knife and the different options and just seeing what can happen. So I had a lot of fun with this one. It's just a very quick tutorial, a little demo, basically a tooltip tutorial. And thank you so much for checking it out, and take care.